Well, hello everybody and welcome. We are so happy to be back here at the table talking about forecasting and retail forecasting and replenishment and all things models. Again, hello Arjuris, how are you doing?
Hi Dan, doing great. Excited to be here for the second time.
Yeah. Yeah, hey, the first episode of the podcast was pretty fun and you got some pretty good feedback on LinkedIn when you shared some of those bits and pieces of wisdom there. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
true. That's true.
thanks everybody for commenting. Keep the engagement going. We're slowly trying to make this profession better and add to the current state of things. And I think one of the best ways we can go about that is to have conversations like this one. And if you participate, then it's all the more valuable. So we're really looking forward to your comments and questions. And feel free to argue with us. That's one of the best things in the world when we can get to have constructive debate. And constructive debate. Speaking of constructive debate, we have a topic that tends to ruffle some feathers today, and it is about deterministic forecasting, which is almost a cuss word for you guys at Kivos. Deterministic forecasting. Just first of all, yeah, what's wrong with deterministic forecasting, Arjuris?
So the missing forecasting, the main thing that starts the problem is that they are very simple. Somebody would say that simple is good, everybody can understand it, but the problem is that yes, it's a simplicity that you don't want to have, because the simplicity comes with leaving out all the necessary information that should be included in order for you to make a decision. So the main issue that we're dealing with deterministic or time series forecasting is that when you make a prediction about the future, you would like to understand all the possible outcomes and based on that make a decision. The thing with deterministic forecasting is that they don't support that. They will give you for each future period, right, a single point of view, and that single point of view is the average scenario out of multiple scenarios. So you're missing information that is important to do your job. The fact that the risk forecasts are simple is that they have been also dominant for the last half century of planning, and since they have been for quite there for a long time, all the processes, the business processes that have been developed around planning, demand planning, supply planning, all this inventory management have been based on the fact that the forecasts, the tools, the modeling that happens is going to be using this deterministic approach. So the simple question that should make you wonder is that, since they've been simple and we're using them for the last 50 years, why are we still trying to solve the same problem? Why are we still having the same inventory issues, not being able to capture the opportunity out there to sell to the customers, and we're not able to service them right? So it should make us think that the fact that the last 50 years we haven't managed to address the issues, the businesses we have in retail using this forecast probably means that instead of and it doesn't mean that it's been static for the last 15 years. There have been extensive analysis and new proposition about again generating still time series forecasts, and all the tooling and the processes that has been developed and extensively researched and changed again still generate the same type of forecast, and that's been an issue. It's just an issue because also they create, all this methodology, all this tooling has also created sometimes their own KPIs for the business to monitor. And my favorite one is, of course, the forecast accuracy, or if you want to call it in a different way, it's the forecast error that you're trying to measure. So many times you get the question from our customers, we get it ourselves. What's the forecast accuracy we should be expecting to see, or how much reduction in the forecast error will improve the business outcome, the inventory levels and things like that. And it's very hard to answer when you're using this kind of models. And the whole, you might have, let's say, benchmarks out there that, will give you some estimation that if you reduce your forecast error by 10%, you might increase sales by 5%. And this is, really generalized things. And my main objection about this is that the simplicity of the forecast and all the tooling and all the measuring and all that has made the people, all the business people working for, planning, specifically in retail, to focus heavily on what is the forecast itself, instead of spending the same effort to develop the modeling in where this forecast is going to be used. So we're stuck with the deterministic forecast, and still we cannot get out. So that's a major issue, and if we want to move on, we should try to change that perception. So this simplicity of deterministic forecast is actually, it's really a trap. And what do I mean by that is you tend to think that because history, actuals, what happened, you have a single point of view about that. For example, you had some specific sales on a specific day because some conditions, applied and it happened. You think that also in the future you should have a single perception of what's going to happen. But then again, if you think about it, the past is past. Something, as you said, some conditions materialized and you got your actuals. But what you need to consider is that in the future, you don't know what's going to happen yet. And this is what you're trying to estimate. So if you limit it to a single scenario, then you are in danger. And another misconception regarding that is, many people think that if you add tons of data into your models, things will improve. Even though you're still predicting that a single thing will happen in the future. So you're trying to, improve your modeling and enhance it with, taking multiple factors into account, but you're forgetting to do a single thing, that those factors need to be, creating multiple scenarios in the future. So you can't be using all this information and then narrow it down to a single point. And this is what happens with, this time series forecasting, and this is what needs to be heavily avoided. So what's wrong with aggregating time series forecasts? Well, the issue with aggregation is that, and again, it's another issue why deterministic forecast is not a good thing, is that, as we said before, the deterministic time series forecast will give you a single point of view in every future scenario you're gonna have. And because let's say you have a single value, so an estimate would be that a specific item in a specific location, you might be expecting to sell, let's say, 2 units of that. And then you have this average point of view, and you might have for multiple days in the future, and sum them up all together. So the danger there is that maybe in a single day, if you look at that, because it's a very short time span, yes, it's an average scenario, you might get that, so you might get away with it as well. So as we said, you're looking only a single scenario of that day. But if you expand over time and you got away in a single day, does it mean that going always and looking at a single scenario that will happen in a bigger time span, do you think you're going to be the same, so lucky again to always hit the average scenario? In reality, it has proven that, and everybody knows who's in real business, that on a daily basis you have a lot of exceptions, and these exceptions are going out of the ordinary. So the average perception you have in mind, especially if you actually expand over time, it's proven that you're going to be falling short, or you're going to be falling high, meaning that in a retail context you might be overstocked or understocked. And this will happen exactly because you always has the average in mind, and you don't explore all the other scenarios. The next point is about the deterministic nature of this forecast doesn't account for the randomness. And if you don't mind me having an example, the randomness comes with the real life complexities of any real life problem. For example, even driving a car might be considered pretty simple, right? But then again, you're not driving the car on your own. In the streets, there are going to be other drivers. There might be rules, but nobody means that the rules are enforced. Somebody might be, looking and listening at our podcast currently and not, behaving on the streets. There are, let's say animals. There are kids walking in the streets. All these things, this is, randomness, right? Even in a controlled environment with such an easy example of driving a car, things are not going well. And no wonder why autonomous driving is not the mainstream, right? Huge billions are invested in this direction. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing, it's the right thing to do, but because of the complication of the whole scenario, randomness, things are not progressing as expected initially. The similar case applies for the retail world. It's complex. It's going to have randomness, right? You cannot control how consumers react, right? So if you're not able to control it, somehow you need to be able to measure it and take it into account in your calculations. Otherwise, whatever you have there is probably wrong. And this is the case. So randomness needs to be accounted. We need to make sure that it is part of the whole modeling. Determinism and this kind of models doesn't really handle that part. And which leads us to the next point. You don't handle that part, which means that, yes, definitely you project something, you have some values, you expect something, and that something is artificial, or it's the optimal way or the usual way of things happening. When you don't want to account for randomness, it means that you expect things to be as usual, which means what I did yesterday or the day before or last Christmas, last Easter, last summer, last whatever seasonality you want to bring in. It's a good thing to be based in the history, but you shouldn't expect that to be exactly what's going to happen in the future, right? So if you base your assumption that the business is as usual, and you don't take into account that probably there will be a lot of uncertainty around that, and don't take that into your modeling, then you're in a high risk that sometimes when things are going as expected, you're fine. But whenever this doesn't happen, and this doesn't happen a lot, then you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be usually firefighting to deal with the issue in the last minute, while you have the opportunity to account for it as a risk and base your investment and make sure that whatever you plan for, based on, of course, your availability and your budget, how much you want to spend on it, some of this uncertainty can always be taken into account. So that's another way why this deterministic time series forecast doesn't really help us solve the problem, because it leads us to different thinking, different direction. That's also the point.
Yeah, Arjus, it just looks so accurate. I mean, you have concrete values and it just looks so accurate. I guess that's why it fools many people, let's say.
It is, but then again, this is again a simplification of things. It looks accurate. It looks accurate because you're looking at it only from a single point of view. It's based on the optimistic look you have on that, ignoring the randomness, and then you're not accounting for the uncertainty. That's why you have a false perception of looking accurate. And this is also a perception of, I think it's, all of us humans, we have the perception that when something is, when you simplify something and it makes sense and you find it to be easy, you accept it, right? Because, if everybody believes about that, then it's okay. It's normal to believe that it's the right thing to do. Nevertheless, the point is that this simplification is costing us a lot because we are narrow-sighted in something that is very wide. And it's very wide because we said before, the complexity around the problem you're trying to solve, you're trying to understand what will be the demand in your network. It's a retail network, it's a live thing. There is a lot of things that are going to happen. It might look accurate, but based on the actuals, the next day when you realize what will happen, you understand that the perception of accuracy you had last day
is probably wrong. And that's the problem there. So the future and the future information we have, as we said before, it's very useful. It's very useful, but it's useful when you project it in the future with all its uncertainty. Otherwise, if you expect something to be averaged in the future, then probably you're looking at the wrong thing. You have a wrong perception of how things will look like. So that's accuracy is false.
Yeah.
And that's something we need to make sure
False
that
sense of accuracy. But
false sense of
Arjun, okay,
accuracy.
so isn't the world, or at least the world of retail, aren't they aware of these things? So why are we still defaulting to deterministic models instead of probability-based stochastic models? Like, where have we gone wrong?
I think that where we've gone wrong, so that there is to be a mind shift, a change there, right? So we need to change. And the truth is that in the retail world, the majority of systems, solutions provided has this perception. And it's perception that's probably now the 6 decades old, right?
Mhm.
And when it started, it was fine because, again, then the world was never static, right? But then again, it was not so dynamic as it is today. I think that the problem we have there, it might start with also the concept that the concept of probability theory or these probability models. Even if you go back to school, remember, as a student or something like that, it wasn't probably the most popular classes, right? So nobody liked that. And I think that there is a false perception that probability is something, weird or strange, while in essence, there are very good examples that it's very common and we use it in our daily life. The simplest example would be the weather forecast, right? The weather forecast for a decade or more, when you see that, you're going to see that on a daily basis. And if you want to plan to do some actions, you have a, let's say, birthday party, or you're trying to go out to do some sports, you might see the weather and you might see that what you're looking at is okay. It might be sunshiny, or it might be cloudy. But then again, on that cloudy part of things, you can also check, is there a chance of rain? If the chance of rain is just 10%, everybody knows that, okay, it's pretty safe to organize something and go out. If it's 90%, then probably you say, yeah, let's leave it for another day. So probability is already part of our life. I mean, there are, it's happening and we're used to that. So, and there are also other areas like investment banking, which is for decades old. All the decisions in that side of things is taking life. Imagine that you have a portfolio, right, and you're having your life savings there, and then these investment bankers were actually working with the deterministic models. Would you trust your money on that? Probably not. And believe me or not, in any domain industry where is risk analysis required, there is no deterministic modeling there because they need to account for all this uncertainty to protect you from that, right? So the mindset needs to change, and there is a shift that we are trying to do in retail. Hopefully, with our customers, we see that there is things to do there, and when you discuss and analyze about that, the whole obsession behind the deterministic approaches goes away. And the problem we have to deal with is that it's not about only a forecasting that has an issue. The whole process built on this deterministic modeling and creates issues in the perception. So that the organization is driven to handle parameters or some other artifacts that distracts them from the reality of running their business. So the mind shift needs to include all that. And I think that's a very healthy thing to do, the discussion to have there, because also it helps the organization understand, like the example I mentioned in the beginning, that they shouldn't be worried that they need to upskill themselves into maths or analytics or in concepts that really doesn't make sense to the business. The concept is that we're using these models to get closer to the reality, but also to the reality of the business organization, because the organization plans based, especially in metrics like sales targets, profit, margins, the customer perception, right? All these things are things that we want to help them understand and get them into the approach of working with organization. So in this sense, why stochastic forecasting is better? It's better because it shifts the mindset and you now focus on what do I want to achieve? What's my strategy, right? How do I plan my assortments? What is the different, margins I want to make out of it? You can even plan and say that there are specific categories in my assortment that it's not, let's say, that a high priority. I might be stocked out, and this is really fine. You can really define that. You don't have to worry about that. So we change the perception. You don't have to worry about concepts like safety stocks. What are safety stocks? Why do I need this kind of buffers? Why do I need to think about buffering instead of planning my margins, right? So there is a shift there. You can do this when you control the uncertainty, because, for example, the safety stock as a concept is exactly that. I'm uncertain about an outcome. I cannot measure it. I don't know. So I plan for this safety stock with some formula, and I hope that everything works for the best. Well, it means that you're going to spend time trying to figure out and getting some numbers in place. Instead of that, we tell you, okay, what's your strategy? What do you want to achieve? Do you mind being stocked out in this area of your business because you're going to invest in some other area because the margin is different, or you want to have a different footprint in the market? That's what you need to focus. Let the rest of the things be handled by a model that can capture uncertainty and get you to the right direction. You don't have to do some magic to get to that number. The numbers will come out from the whole modeling.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about stochastic forecasting now, but we haven't really defined it. So when you say stochastic forecasting, what exactly are you talking about?
Right. So the simple example would be that on any occasion that you're trying to make any kind of prediction in the future, you need to make sure that you're taking into account all possible outcomes. I think we briefly mentioned it before. It's like the example with the weather. When you're expecting tomorrow to have some rain, you need to make sure that your decision is based on some kind of risk or uncertainty rather. And when the weather forecast tells you it's 10% chance that's going to rain, it actually gives you a measure of the risk you're taking. So 10%, I suspect that for most people might be a low risk, while 90% chance of rain is a high risk. So that's a different. And if you convert that to an example in the retail world, it would mean that whenever you actually make a prediction for the future demand of a product you're trying to sell in a store, it will be a similar case. Instead of projecting 0.2 units of something in a day, you might say that in that day, 90% I have zero probability of selling it, 10% have, selling a unit. Or if it's something, let's say, not so slow moving or it's faster moving. So in an everyday case scenario, you have different outcomes, the sales you're gonna make, and each sale is weighted by the chance of happening. Then, based on that, if and how much you want to invest to support that decision, which means how much risk you're taking in order to make the decision to order for this demand, to cover it, right? That's the difference. The difference is that in one case, you have a single value, which means that you're going averaged out. It might happen. On the other case, you might have a span, different outcomes. And with all these outcomes, and based on how much investment you're going to make, you're able to capture this uncertainty. You might be able to say that I have and this is where you do also the fine tuning, right? For some categories and some departments in your organization, when you want to be a leader in the market, you might invest more, which means that you're going to cover more of these scenarios and you are actually investing more for the opportunity. On some other areas of business, you might say that you're not really so much interested and it doesn't play a significant role for your strategy, and then you invest less. So again, you're still going to have to cover some cases, but it might be less. So see the difference? We're talking about, again, business decisions. I want to cover, I want to be leader, I want to take over the opportunity. We stop talking about I want to set some safety stocks or I want to define some service level. We don't have this terminology anymore because we don't consider to be appropriate for the business discussions we're having with the customers.
Yeah, that client story you said in the beginning, I think it illuminates this shift in mindset quite well. So with the client, they came to you with the question, okay, what's going to be the demand? I don't know, 21 days from now in this certain store. And so you realize that they were looking for some exact number to a question that shouldn't even be asked. So you sort of flip the question on its head and change the business situation and said, okay, we have a budget and we are trying to allocate our investments in the optimal way. So in a way, what you are doing is you are turning this into an optimization problem using probabilities.
Exactly.
That's how I understand, how I perceive this
Exactly. Exactly as you mentioned. So the steps in this approach is exactly as you mentioned. In the end, it ends up to be an optimization problem. Why it's an optimization problem? Because you're trying to maximize or minimize something. You might be trying to maximize, for example, the opportunity profit budget, or you're trying to minimize inventory levels, right? And in this problem, when you try to do that, there are going to be different variables that take into account, and some of it might be also constraints that you, for example, you might want to increase profitability, but there is a certain budget you can spend for each different category you're trying to buy. But that's the end of the story. The end of the story is always an optimization problem and should be. Although unlikely that there are many, let's say, replenishment systems around, we have seen that neglect this option. So they leave the customer in the end to do the optimization either on his mind or in spreadsheets or whatever. The end of the story. To come out to this story, to be able to do a proper optimization, you need beforehand to prepare all the scenarios, right? And to get to the multiple scenarios of what's possible to come, and because of these multiple scenarios, that's why you want to have optimization. The first step is what we said before. You need to be able to generate all the different scenarios, weight them on the probability, on the chance of happening, get the risk and the reward, measuring what can happen, and then in the end decide on the end decision. Because of course your decision, it has to be something deterministic. In the end, you're executing. You need to know you're going to buy exactly some quantity. But to get that quantity, there are different steps in the way. And these steps can only be done by this way.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. One other analogy that comes to mind with this is to think like an investor. So when operating a business, you are very often advised to think like an investor for various reasons. And what this approach, this logic reminds me of is exactly investment. So you have an amount of money that you want to distribute in an optimal way, taking into consideration risks and different probabilities. So it's just like investment optimization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, it's like that. It's about thinking it is a problem in the retail context, but in the end, it's like any other business. As a retailer, you're trying to invest some money and get some profit back, right? So if you stop thinking retail and start thinking finance, and think about your organization and the products you have, like a portfolio, as we said before, then that's where the solution, the discussion is, right?
Yeah. Argyris, this was great. I'm very glad we had this conversation, and I can't wait for our next one. Do you have a topic in mind? Have we thought about that? Yeah, we got a couple of topics, don't we?
I think that because we don't want to, to super focus on the forecasting side of things only, I think that the next thing is to go and see the pitfalls on the next stage, because forecasting, as we said, is critical, it's important, but you need to see that what is the next step, what is the modeling, what is this modeling about supply chain, and how we can have something that they consider all these scenarios. Because as we said in the beginning of discussion regarding the forecast, when we said aggregating over time, that's a very nice concept, a very good example, that because it's not only that we model and we need stochastic forecasting for demand, we need it for other things like lead times. Lead times is something that it's exactly, if you think of it, it belongs to, as we say, the discussion of when you're trying to model your supply chain, you need to know how much time things get. When you order them, there is a time delay until you receive them, right? But then again, this also goes back to what I said before. When you're preparing a a forecast to understand the demand. You need to also take into account, I'm making a decision, and what is the horizon? What's the time span that I need to respond? So there goes your lead time. The major problem that we have is that even this prediction of the lead time, 99% of the time is quite static today. It's a contractual agreement you have with your supplier, and you take what's on the paper. But in reality, again, there's variability to that as well. You might have 5 days of a lead time, but if you look at the actuals, and this is what we see in all the customers we have, it might be 80% of the time your supplier delivers, in 5 days, but sometimes it might be, 5% or 10%. It might be 6 days, another 5% to be 7 days. So if you don't take that into account, and also there is another factor, it's not only when it delivers, it's how much of what you order is in that track. Is it 9% of my order, 80% of my order? So you see two variables, right? That we haven't discussed at all because we're focused on the forecasting side of only the demand, but there are a lot of things that can break down the line. And this also requires this kind of an approach to be able to measure their uncertainty. And this is the next step of modeling and looking what's happening in the next stage.
Great. You just gave us an awesome teaser and sort of already did half of the next episode's recording almost. Yeah, that was a very detailed teaser. I'm excited for it, looking forward to it, and thank you so much. And I'll talk to you later.
Thank you all for joining today. Thank you for listening. Feel free to connect with us and connect with me. I mean, I'm really interested to have discussions with you, especially if it's about retail, anything that concerns you. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn. I would really be happy to join some conversations. And for any of the material we have, feel free to look at our website, kivos.ai. You will find there some information, and we're looking forward to see you on the next episode.
And also check out the brand new Spotify and YouTube channels where these conversations are also broadcasted. So wherever you are and wherever you consume media, we're there, and you can find the Kivos podcast.